April 7, 1945. The Pacific Ocean lay still deceptively calm beneath a brooding sky. Then, in the distance, something vast moved slicing through the gray waves like a steel leviathan. The sea itself seemed to tremble under its weight. This was Yamato, the pride of Imperial Japan, the largest and most powerful battleship ever built, and soon, the stage for one of history's most tragic legends. She was not just a ship, she was an empire's dream forged in armor and fire. Conceived in secrecy at the Kure Naval Arsenal, Yamato's creation was Japan's answer to the growing might of the United States Navy. For years, she was built behind closed doors, away from prying eyes. Thousands of workers labored day and night, welding together her 70,000 tons of steel. Her hull alone could have swallowed entire destroyers. Her armor was thicker than anything the world had ever seen. And her main guns, the monstrous 18.1-inch cannons, were so huge that their shells could punch through any ship afloat. When Yamato was completed, she was more than a war machine, she was a symbol. A floating cathedral of national pride. Her name itself meant great harmony, a poetic reflection of Japan's soul and strength. To the admirals of the Imperial Navy, Yamato embodied their faith in the supremacy of battleships, a belief that naval power would always be decided by steel and fire, not by aircraft or bombs dropped from the clouds. But as she sailed into the waning months of World War II, that belief was already a ghost. The age of battleships was dying quietly, beneath the roar of engines and the scream of dive bombers. Yet, Japan refused to let go of its myth that Yamato was unsinkable. To those who built her, she was perfection, her guns, her armor, her engines all unmatched. Her turrets alone weighed as much as a destroyer. Her shells, each nearly a ton, could devastate entire ships with a single hit. She could outrun older vessels and take punishment no other battleship could survive. In their minds, she was invincible. In their hearts, she was divine. When Yamato first cut through the Pacific waters, her massive wake shimmered under the morning sun like a trail of silver. Crewmen stood proudly along her decks, their uniforms spotless, their spirits high. They called her the floating fortress, the steel mountain, the ship of the gods. One sailor wrote in his journal, "I serve aboard the most powerful ship ever built." The ocean itself bows before her. But as months turned to years, Japan's empire began to crumble. The once mighty fleet was shattered. Islands fell one after another. And Yamato, the pride of the Navy, spent most of her life anchored, waiting for a decisive battle that never came. Her guns fired rarely. Her engines idled. The ship built to dominate the Pacific had become a sleeping giant admired, but unused. By 1945, Japan was desperate. Its cities burned under relentless air raids. Its navy was a shadow of its former self. Yet Yamato remained a symbol of hope, of defiance, of one last chance. When word came that the Americans were closing in on Okinawa, Japan's final stronghold, the decision was made. Yamato would sail one last time. It was a mission born not of strategy, but of honor and despair. The plan was simple and tragic. Yamato would head for Okinawa, beach herself, and fight as a stationary fortress until destroyed. She would die standing. The mission was, in truth, a one-way voyage. There would be no air cover, no refueling, no retreat. The crew knew this. And yet, they volunteered. Before departure, the officers addressed their men. "This is the Emperor's will," they said. "You will fight to the last shell. You will die as warriors." There were no illusions left, only pride. One sailor wrote to his mother, "We are going to Okinawa. I will not return. But I am happy to die aboard Yamato." At dawn, April 6th, Yamato left Tokuyama Harbor, escorted by a handful of destroyers. Her engines roared to life for massive turbines pushing her through the waves with unmatched power. From the shore, people gathered to watch her go. Women wept. Children waved flags. Old men saluted. As her massive hull slipped away into the mist, it felt as if Japan itself was fading with her. For the crew aboard, the atmosphere was surreal. Beneath the decks, the heat from the engines mixed with the smell of oil and salt. On the bridge, officers stood silent, watching the gray horizon ahead. Many of them knew they were sailing toward death. Yet there was no fear. Only duty. Only the quiet pride of men who believed they were part of something greater than themselves. Far above, however, the U.S. Navy already knew Yamato was coming. American reconnaissance planes had spotted her. Orders were given. The sky would soon fill with hundreds of carrier-based aircraft dive bombers, torpedo planes, and fighters all converging on one target. The men aboard Yamato could not see them yet. They could not hear the engines or feel the tremors of distant thunder. But fate was already closing in. For now, she remained majestic, a mountain of steel cutting through endless waters, her bow crashing through waves, her crew standing proud. The Empire still believed in her legend, still clung to the illusion that the unsinkable ship would somehow defy the impossible. But the truth was waiting. 300 American planes would soon descend upon her, and the myth of Yamato would vanish beneath the waves. December 16, 1941. The world had already witnessed the shock of Pearl Harbor. The Imperial Japanese Navy had struck with precision, speed, and ruthlessness. Across the Pacific, their dominance seemed unassailable. Amidst this climate of fear and awe, Yamato stood not merely as a ship but as a tangible symbol of Japan's naval supremacy. She was the embodiment of the Empire's pride, the floating proof that Japan could rival and surpass any power at sea. At anchor in the Kure naval base, the battleship loomed like a mountain of steel. From the waterline to the top of her massive turrets, she measured nearly 263 meters in length, dwarfing every vessel in the harbor. Sailors and officers moved across her decks, each step resonating on steel plates as thick as a man's height. The hatches, the gun turrets, the radar arrays, all were immense, meticulously engineered, and perfectly maintained. Yamato was more than a warship. She was a floating fortress, a palace of war, a masterpiece of human engineering designed to command respect and awe. Her guns, the 18.1-inch main battery, were the largest ever mounted on a battleship. Each turret alone weighed more than a destroyer, capable of firing shells over 40 kilometers, capable of leveling any enemy ship in a single salvo. Her secondary guns, anti-aircraft batteries, and armor belt made her a near-impenetrable fortress on water. Every plank, every bolt, every line of armor spoke of decades of naval ambition, of the desire to forge a weapon that no force could touch. The crew aboard Yamato were more than sailors. They were custodians of a national symbol. Officers drilled with precision, inspecting every turret and engine room. Sailors polished the decks until they gleamed, their reflections mirroring the early morning sun. Discipline was strict. Pride was absolute. To serve on Yamato was to stand at the pinnacle of Japanese naval tradition, to be entrusted with the Empire's honor. Across Japan, newspapers and radio broadcasts praised the battleship's might. She was the ultimate deterrent against the growing American threat, the floating embodiment of a doctrine that revered battleships as the final arbiters of naval warfare. Military schools studied her construction. Strategists debated her potential. Diplomats cited her presence in negotiations. She was more than a ship, she was a symbol of inevitability, of power, of national destiny. Yet, despite her awe-inspiring presence, Yamato was also a reflection of a philosophy under siege. The Empire's leaders believed that naval power was determined by armor and guns, that no plane could sink a battleship of her caliber. Admiral Yamamoto himself, despite understanding the rise of air power, could not fully convince the naval hierarchy to shift strategy. For them, Yamato was invincible. She was perfection in steel, unassailable, the epitome of naval doctrine. When she made her first voyages into open waters, the effect on both Japanese sailors and enemy reconnaissance was palpable. Intelligence reports described the battleship as a floating mountain, a force that dominated the horizon. Pilots and enemy commanders who glimpsed her from afar often reported a sense of awe and dread. Even Americans, aware of her construction, struggled to fully comprehend the scale of her threat. To many, she seemed less a vessel than a myth made real, gliding across the Pacific with an almost supernatural presence. On board, life was regimented but infused with a quiet pride of knowing they served on the apex of naval power. Officers held briefings in the war rooms, plotting maneuvers, drills, and strategies. Sailors maintained the engines, cleaned the brass, and manned the anti-aircraft guns. Each man, from the newest recruit to the veteran officer, understood the weight of the ship, not just her physical tonnage, but the immense expectations of an empire depending on her. Every sunrise brought inspections, training, and drills. Every sunset reflected the glint of steel across calm waters, the promise of dominance that Yamato represented. Her very presence influenced the broader Pacific campaign. Convoys and island garrisons looked to her for protection, Japanese propaganda exalted her might, and enemy forces plotted around the shadow of her guns. She was designed to intimidate, to project power, and for a time, she did so with terrifying effectiveness. But beneath the steel and pride, a quiet tension simmered. While Yamato represented ultimate power, the world of naval warfare was shifting. Aircraft carriers, submarines, and air power were beginning to define the battlefield. Yet in the minds of Japanese admirals, the battleship remained king, and Yamato was their unmatched champion. She was the pride of the empire, a floating testament to ambition, artistry, and a nation's faith in its might. By the spring of 1945, as the war reached its final desperate stages, Yamato would carry that pride into the storm of conflict, into a battle where myths and reality would collide, where the floating fortress would face an enemy she could not anticipate, and where the legend of the unsinkable ship would be tested against the unrelenting tide of modern warfare. Her deck, polished and gleaming, stretched into the horizon, a symbol of both technological achievement and national aspiration. And yet, the storm clouds gathering over the Pacific whispered a foreboding truth. The pride of the empire was about to face a reckoning unlike anything in its history. April 7, 1945. The early morning haze hung heavy over the East China Sea. From the deck of Yamato, the massive battleship cut through the calm waters, her 18-inch guns silent yet ever-present, looming like watchful sentinels. Japanese sailors, trained to perfection, moved with precision along her steel expanse. Officers reviewed navigation charts and final orders for Operation Tengo, the mission that would send their floating fortress to Okinawa. Confidence, discipline, and pride filled every corner of the ship. To them, Yamato was invincible, untouchable, the apex of naval engineering and Japan's hope in a war rapidly turning against them. But far above the horizon, the first specks of Allied air power began to appear, tiny dots at first, almost imperceptible against the morning sky. 4 Japanese lookouts. The sea seemed deceptively quiet. Yet each dot grew, swarming like a storm, a vast armada of aircraft moving with deadly intent. Over 300 U.S. Navy planes had been launched from carriers positioned strategically to intercept the Yamato before she could reach Okinawa. Fighter bombers, dive bombers, and torpedo planes advanced in coordinated waves, their engines roaring, each pilot aware of the monumental task ahead. The sheer scale of the attack was overwhelming, a kinetic hurricane of metal and fire hurtling toward the largest battleship ever built. On board Yamato, the crew noticed the distant silhouettes on the radar and visual lookout stations. Initially, confidence prevailed. The ship's armor was unmatched, her guns capable of turning the attackers into scrap. Sailors whispered to each other with a mixture of pride and excitement. This was the chance to prove the invincibility of the Empire's pride. Yet, beneath the surface, an uneasy tension simmered. No matter the size of the ship, hundreds of fast-moving planes with coordinated attacks presented a danger unlike any the crew had faced. The U.S. pilots, aware of Yamato's legend, pushed with precision and daring. Flying low to avoid detection, dive bombers arced from the clouds, torpedo planes skimmed the waves, and fighters circled high above, providing cover for the relentless strike groups. Each attack was choreographed for maximum effect. The element of surprise was their ally, speed their weapon, and courage their shield. For the American aviators, Yamato was no myth. She was a target of unfathomable power, yet one that could be felled by careful coordination, timing, and sheer audacity. As the planes drew closer, the battleship's anti-aircraft guns roared to life, cutting through the morning mist with fire and smoke. Flak exploded around incoming aircraft, streaking the sky with sparks and fire. Yet, for every plane shot down, dozens more pressed forward, guided by skill, determination, and the relentless momentum of the U.S. Navy's assault. Each torpedo that entered the water represented a precise, deadly calculation, the culmination of training, intelligence, and the grim will to destroy what the Japanese claimed could not be destroyed. The tension aboard Yamato escalated with each passing minute. Sailors manned the turrets, sweating beneath their uniforms, gripping the brass handles of machine guns, eyes scanning the sky for any sign of weakness. Officers shouted orders, coordinating anti-aircraft batteries with split-second precision. The once calm deck became a maelstrom of sound and motion, alarms ringing, men running, guns firing, and the ever-present vibration of the ship's massive engines thrumming beneath them. Pride battled fear, discipline battled instinct. They were the custodians of a legend, yet the legend now faced the ultimate test. Above, the planes began their first wave of dives, each one a deadly arc of speed and precision. Bombs whistled, torpedoes plowed through water toward the hull, and the sky became a blur of motion, color, and fire. Sailors reacted instinctively, firing, ducking, and coordinating in a desperate attempt to defend the ship that symbolized their nation. The scale of the attack was staggering. Yamato, for all her size, was suddenly surrounded by a sea of predators in the air, each one determined to exploit the smallest flaw, the slightest hesitation. The American pilots faced their own peril. Anti-aircraft fire shredded the air around them, and the sheer size of Yamato demanded unwavering focus. Yet courage, training, and the knowledge of the stakes drove them forward. Each approach brought the possibility of death, yet also the potential to make history. In this deadly ballet, human will and technological might collided, a confrontation that would redefine naval warfare. By mid-morning, the first torpedoes struck. Explosions rippled along the side of the ship, water and fire erupting from impacts, the hull trembling beneath the enormity of the assault. Smoke rose, mingling with the morning haze, and the once pristine deck was a chaos of battle shouts and the unrelenting violence of modern war. Yamato's pride and the crew's discipline were tested as never before. For the U.S. planes, the attack was terrifying yet precise, the culmination of courage, coordination, and the strategic recognition that no matter the myth, even the mightiest battleship could be brought low. The approach of 300 planes was not just an attack. It was a turning point. It was the confrontation between the old era of battleships and the new age of air power. And for Yamato, the legend, the pride, and the human courage aboard her would soon collide with the unstoppable force of history itself. April 7, 1945, 9:30 a.m. The East China Sea had transformed from a placid expanse of water into a theater of chaos and fire. Yamato, the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, now steamed amid a wall of smoke, explosions, and the deafening roar of hundreds of engines above her. From her massive deck, Japanese sailors stared at the sky, eyes wide with disbelief and terror. The legends of invincibility they had lived by for years were under assault, and the onslaught had only just begun. The American aircraft struck in waves, a meticulously orchestrated storm of destruction. Torpedo bombers skimmed mere feet above the water, their steel missiles cutting through the waves like hunting knives. Dive bombers arced from the clouds, releasing their payloads with deadly precision, each bomb seeking the deck, the superstructure, the vulnerable heart of the ship. High above, fighters swept in to intercept any Japanese aircraft daring to defend their colossal warship. Smoke and fire filled the horizon, and the sheer scale of the attack created a surreal, almost apocalyptic scene. On Yamato's deck, the anti-aircraft guns fired relentlessly. Flak shells exploded in the sky, painting streaks of orange and white against the pale morning. Crewmen ducked under gun mounts, reloaded cannons frantically, and shouted orders over the cacophony. The ship shuddered violently as torpedoes ripped through her side, each explosion twisting steel and tearing hull plating. Water surged into breached compartments, flooding corridors, knocking men off their feet. Yet despite the horror, discipline remained. Officers moved from station to station, shouting calm, precise commands, each one a desperate attempt to maintain order amid the chaos. Below decks, engineers and damage control teams fought a silent battle against the encroaching sea. Pumps whined and clanked, valves were twisted, and hatches sealed as water surged into the ship's belly. Sweat poured from men's faces, salt and smoke mingling on their skin, yet no one faltered. Every second counted. Every failure could mean the ship's demise. Their efforts were heroic, human defiance against the inevitability of modern warfare, a testament to courage forged in the crucible of desperation. Above, the waves themselves seemed to churn in sympathy with the assault. Torpedo wakes streaked across the water, dive bomber plumes punctured the sky, and the wind carried the scent of smoke and burning fuel. The sheer violence of the American strike was almost elemental, air and sea, man and machine, colliding in a spectacular, terrifying dance. Yamato's guns, magnificent yet insufficient against this swarm, tore into the attackers, claiming a few victims but unable to stem the tide. The deck, once a symbol of untouchable power, now became a precarious, heaving platform of fear and determination. The sailors' faces told the story of human stakes. Eyes darted from horizon to deck, searching for survival and scanning for attack. Some whispered prayers, others shouted encouragement. Every explosion, every shockwave through the hull, tested their endurance and resolve. Crewmen fell, injured by debris or shrapnel, and were dragged to safety, only to return to their posts if they could. In that moment, the myth of Yamato became inseparable from the courage of those aboard her human heroism bound to steel, facing an unrelenting storm of fire. American pilots pressed relentlessly. Torpedo runs came in from starboard, then port, dive bombers streaked from above. Each wave was more intense, more coordinated, a choreography of destruction designed to exploit Yamato's size and vulnerabilities. The sea seemed to erupt as torpedoes struck, sending geysers of water and steel into the sky. Decks tilted, superstructures twisted, and fire spread across the vessel, black smoke climbing like a living entity. The battle had become as much a test of human will as a technical engagement. Despite the fury, Yamato remained afloat. Her massive armor absorbed some punishment, but each hit sapped her power, each explosion chipped away at her invincibility. Sailors clung to order, performing their duties with a mixture of fear and pride, knowing that history was being written with every passing minute. Officers barked instructions, medics tended to the wounded, and gunners fired with unwavering determination. Every heartbeat felt magnified, every breath a measure of survival. The relentless strike also revealed the evolution of warfare, the end of battleships' dominance and the rise of carrier-based air power. Yamato, for all her technological and engineering might, was a relic against an enemy that had mastered the skies. Yet within that vulnerability lay the human story, the courage, loyalty, and steadfastness of those who manned her, refusing to surrender even as the inevitable approached. By late morning, Yamato began to list, her once pristine deck scarred with craters, fires raging, and smoke turning the sky into a veil of ash. Yet even in this dire moment, human tenacity shone. Sailors continued their stations, coordinated damage control, and prepared for the final act of survival. The relentless strike of 300 planes had tested the limits of men and metal alike, demonstrating that no legend, no matter how colossal, could withstand the combined force of precision, courage, and unyielding determination. In that crucible of fire, smoke, and courage, Yamato's story became not only one of a sinking battleship but a testament to human resilience under overwhelming odds. The battle had shifted from engineering marvel versus myth to a stage where human will and the relentless tide of modern warfare collided in unforgettable, cinematic intensity. April 7, 1945, 10 a.m. The morning sky over the East China Sea was now a theater of human endurance and unimaginable loss. Flames licked Yamato's superstructure, smoke coiling high into the air like a dark monument to war. The deafening roar of explosions, punctuated by the cries of men and the shriek of tearing metal, created a symphony of chaos that few could comprehend. On board, the human toll was visible in every corner, sailors covered in soot, blood, and sweat, their faces etched with exhaustion, fear, and determination. The enormity of the ship had once seemed invincible, a floating fortress of the empire. Now, its size was a curse. Corridors became death traps as torpedoes ripped through bulkheads, hurling men into flooded compartments or throwing them into open decks. Fires spread uncontrollably, and smoke choked the air, making each step a fight for breath. Sailors clutched life jackets, huddled in corners, and carried the wounded toward safety, moving with a sense of urgent purpose that defied the carnage surrounding them. Amid the inferno, acts of extraordinary heroism unfolded. Chief petty officers directed crewmen to cut through jammed hatches, dragging men to areas where air still lingered. Damage control teams waded into waist-deep water, sealing ruptured compartments and operating pumps that screamed against the rising tide. Each second mattered the difference between survival and instant death. Men shouted above the thunderous explosions, coordinating rescues and battling both fire and flooding. Their courage became the vessel's heartbeat, an invisible force holding the ship together even as steel bent and splintered. Above decks, gunners continued their desperate defense. Each burst of the 127mm anti-aircraft guns was a defiance against the storm of planes above, a momentary assertion that human skill and bravery could still shape fate. Bullets tore through the air, striking aircraft that dared too close, while sailors reloaded tirelessly, their hands blistered, shaking, and blackened by soot. The sky had become a canvas of motion and chaos, each strike and counterstrike a brushstroke of valor and terror. Survivors were scattered across the ship, many injured but moving with determination. A young sailor, barely 17, carried a comrade with a shattered leg across a tilting deck, navigating through fire and falling debris. Officers, bleeding from minor wounds, continued to direct the crew, their voices commanding yet trembling with urgency. Each act of bravery, each choice to confront overwhelming odds, etched a story of human resilience into the history of that fateful day. Meanwhile, the American assault pressed relentlessly. Dive bombers sliced through clouds, releasing bombs that struck the deck with surgical precision, while torpedo planes approached in low, dangerous runs over the water. The sailors aboard Yamato could do little to prevent these assaults, but they clung to their stations with grim determination. Every explosion, every spray of water and shrapnel, tested their endurance and reminded them of the stakes. Survival was fleeting, heroism eternal. Below decks, the wounded cried for help as smoke and water mingled into a suffocating haze. Medics, themselves barely able to breathe, dragged sailors from burning compartments and bleeding decks. They improvised splints, applied bandages soaked in seawater, and whispered words of encouragement amidst the chaos. The human story became as vivid as the ship itself, men caring for men, courage manifesting not in weapons but in compassion and determination under fire. Some sailors, trapped and disoriented, looked skyward as the relentless waves of American aircraft rained destruction. Each explosion shook the ship violently, sending shockwaves through decks and bulkheads. Yet, despite despair, they persevered, clutching at whatever lifelines remained: a rope, a hatch, a comrade's hand. These moments, ephemeral yet eternal, captured the essence of heroism in the face of annihilation. The human toll was staggering. Hundreds of sailors perished in the early hours of the attack, swallowed by the sea or consumed by fire. Yet those who survived, battered, burned, and exhausted, carried with them stories of courage, sacrifice, and the indomitable spirit that defined the Imperial Navy's final hours. The heroism was not in the myth of Yamato's steel but in the flesh and will of those aboard, confronting the impossible with relentless resolve. By mid-morning, as the ship began its final moments of life, every man still aboard became part of a narrative larger than themselves, a narrative of bravery and loss, of human resilience tested against the unstoppable force of modern warfare. Their actions, recorded in diaries, reports, and survivor testimonies, transformed a story of naval engineering into a story of the human spirit, immortalizing their courage even as the legend of Yamato faced its end. The relentless strike had achieved its grim purpose, but in the wake of devastation, it revealed the depth of human heroism and endurance that, even in the face of an unsurvivable attack, refused to yield, proving that courage, honor, and sacrifice were as formidable as any battleship's armor. April 7, 1945, 12:30 p.m. The sea erupted around Yamato as the assault reached its apex. Thousands of tons of steel, once thought invincible, now groaned and twisted under the relentless onslaught of torpedoes and bombs. Explosions rocked the decks, sending plumes of smoke and fire into the sky. The ship listed heavily to port, water cascading over the sides, and the once mighty superstructure seemed to shrink under the weight of destruction. This was no longer a warship, it was a cathedral of chaos, a monument to both human ambition and vulnerability. Inside, sailors fought against time, fire, and sinking decks. Each compartment became a crucible. Water surged over the knees, then the waist, as bulkheads split and pumps failed. Men shouted over the roar of destruction, directing the wounded to hatches, handing life jackets to those too stunned or injured to move. The ship, despite its size, had become a death trap, an arena where courage and survival coexisted in desperate tension. Above deck, the air was thick with smoke, the scent of burning oil and metal stinging the lungs. Explosions from torpedoes struck with terrifying precision, heaving the ship violently and throwing men into open air. Gunners, blackened by soot, refused to leave their stations, firing at the circling American planes even as the decks tilted beneath them. Their hands, blistered and bleeding, gripped controls with a mixture of desperation and trained reflex. Heroism in its rawest form unfolded with each breathless second. The final moments were almost surreal. Yamato's massive hull, scarred and splintered, began to roll slowly toward its death. Fire consumed the deck, devouring equipment, artillery, and the bodies of those who could not escape. The cries of the wounded and dying were drowned out by the roar of the engines, the blasts of the explosions, and the relentless hammering of the planes above. Smoke and steam created a surreal haze, blurring the edges between sea, sky, and steel. As the ship's list became critical, sailors clung to railings, ropes, and one another. Officers shouted orders over the chaos, directing men toward lifeboats, rafts, or the few remaining exits. The water churned around the massive hull, swallowing debris, personal belongings, and the bodies of those lost in the inferno. Courage here was measured not in offensive action but in survival, in every hand that reached for another, every decision to move forward despite knowing the outcome. American aircraft continued their sweep, releasing bombs and torpedoes with relentless precision. One by one, critical compartments were breached. The once majestic battleship began to break apart. Decks collapsed like dominoes, artillery barrels twisted toward the sky, and masts snapped under the strain of fire and concussion. Each explosion was a punctuation mark in the tragic final chapter of Yamato's history. Amid the chaos, moments of profound human bravery emerged. Sailors, injured or burned, helped their comrades to the lifeboats. Others sacrificed their chance at survival to drag wounded men from flooding compartments. Even as the ship itself became a tomb, these acts of heroism illuminated the human spirit, the refusal to abandon duty, loyalty, or comrades, even in the face of certain death. By 1:15 p.m., Yamato's fate was sealed. The great battleship, symbol of Imperial Japanese pride, rolled onto its side and began to slide beneath the waves. Explosions continued as the remaining pockets of fire and ammunition detonated, sending sheets of flame and water into the air. Sailors clung to debris, rafts, and one another, their faces a mix of relief, grief, and shock as the colossal ship slowly vanished beneath the sea. The Pacific swallowed Yamato, carrying with it both the weight of the Empire's ambitions and the countless human stories intertwined with its final moments. As silence fell, punctuated only by distant aircraft and waves lapping over floating wreckage, the enormity of the loss became clear. Over 3,000 men had perished in the span of hours. Yet those who survived told stories of valor, sacrifice, and endurance. The sinking of Yamato was not merely the destruction of a ship, it was the crucible in which human courage, resilience, and tragedy were forged into history. Even as the hull disappeared, the legend of Yamato remained, defined not solely by steel and guns but by the human hearts that had manned it to the very end. The sea carried their sacrifice, and the world would remember both the scale of the ship and the heroism of its crew, a testament to the indomitable human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. April 7, 1945, 2 p.m. The chaos had passed, yet the Pacific still trembled with echoes of the day's destruction. Survivors clung to floating debris, life rafts, and one another, their faces etched with exhaustion, shock, and disbelief. The legendary Yamato, once the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, had vanished beneath the waves, leaving behind fragments of steel, personal belongings, and human stories that would forever define its final hours. Among the survivors, Lieutenant Hideki Mori recalled the moment the torpedoes struck. "The first explosion threw me across the deck," he remembered. "I saw my comrades engulfed in fire. Smoke filled every corner, and the water rushed in as though the ship itself had become a living enemy." His voice, though steady, carried the weight of memory of men lost, of lives cut short in seconds. Every survivor carried a story of narrowly escaping death, of heroic acts hidden amidst the flames and splintered steel. A young sailor, barely 18, clutched a broken lifeboat, shivering from shock and salt water. He spoke of his friends. "We were tossed into the sea like driftwood. Some floated with us, some vanished beneath the waves. We called out names, but there was only silence in response." In those moments, amid the endless blue, human courage and desperation collided. The water became a stage where fear, instinct, and solidarity intertwined. Medical Officer Lieutenant Yoshio Tanaka worked tirelessly amidst the wreckage, treating burns, cuts, and shock. He described the grim scene. Men lay side by side, some still trying to reach others. The sea was filled with cries, floating debris, and the smell of oil and blood. I tried to save as many as I could, but even then, the ocean claimed more than we could hold on to. Tanaka's account captures the profound human toll, not only the physical injuries but the psychological weight of witnessing comrades perish while survival demands relentless effort. Even among the pilots who had launched the relentless aerial attack, stories of what they had seen haunted them. Lieutenant Commander James Sullivan of the USS Hancock described the surreal spectacle from above. The ship was massive, and yet it looked small from our altitude when it began to burn. Explosions erupted across the deck, and for a moment, it seemed almost unreal, a firework display in the most tragic form. These perspectives, from both attacker and defender, reveal the staggering scale of the event and the intimate human dimension beneath the legend of steel and fire. Survivors spoke often of camaraderie, of acts of courage that defied reason. Sailor Kenji Sato recounted how he and 3 others had carried a wounded comrade across decks tilted nearly vertical. The ship was falling apart beneath us. Every step could have been our last, but we didn't leave him. Somehow, we made it to the water, and together we survived. Moments like this, small yet extraordinary, illuminate the essence of human endurance, ordinary men performing impossible feats under extraordinary circumstances. Among the debris, letters, photographs, and personal items floated like ghosts of lives interrupted. Each object told a story, a reminder that the human element of war is often as compelling as the machines and strategies themselves. Sailors grasped these fragments as if holding onto memory itself, a tether between past and present, life and death. The Pacific became a repository not only of physical wreckage but of collective grief, courage, and resilience. Rescue operations brought the survivors together on a small landing craft, their eyes hollow, their movements stiff from hours adrift. They shared whispered accounts of the final moments aboard Yamato, the explosions, the fires, the heroic last stands of crewmen refusing to abandon guns and stations. These narratives, preserved in oral histories, photographs, and diaries, became the lens through which the world would come to understand the human dimension of the ship's destruction. By nightfall, the sea calmed, leaving only scattered debris and a sense of surreal quiet. Those who had lived through the ordeal clung to rafts and to one another, their faces reflecting both the trauma of loss and the extraordinary resilience that had carried them through. Each story, whether of terror, bravery, or simple survival, added a layer to the Yamato's legacy, a legacy not measured in tonnage or firepower but in the indomitable spirit of those who endured its final fiery hours. The eyewitness accounts crystallize the human heart of this historic event. They remind us that behind every legend of war, behind every titanic vessel and strategic maneuver, lie countless individual experiences of men facing mortality, forging bonds of trust and courage, and navigating the fine line between life and death. In these stories, the immensity of Yamato's loss is mirrored by the extraordinary heroism of its survivors, leaving an enduring testament to the human spirit in the midst of cataclysm. April 7, 1945, 10 a.m. The sky above the East China Sea. Above the rolling waves, 300 American aircraft sliced through the dawn sky, engines roaring, propellers spinning in perfect formation. From this vantage, the massive silhouette of Yamato loomed below a steel leviathan, bristling with anti-aircraft guns, proud and seemingly untouchable. Yet the pilots knew their orders were clear: strike relentlessly, overwhelm her defenses, and ensure the supremacy of the Pacific skies. Lieutenant Commander James Sullivan, leading a squadron of F-6F Hellcats, recalled the surreal tension as they approached the target. We were trained for this, but seeing her up close to the Yamato was enormous, like a floating fortress. I remember thinking, how could anything this massive be brought down? But we had to try. There was no alternative. His words capture the mix of awe and fear, the recognition of the enemy's might balanced by the duty ingrained through rigorous training. As the planes descended into attack runs, gunners aboard Yamato unleashed torrents of fire. Explosions erupted from near misses, and flak cut through the sky in jagged arcs. Pilots had mere seconds to dodge, roll, and line up their strikes. Every dive felt like threading a needle in a storm, Sullivan recounted. You see your wingman take fire, you hear the radio chatter, and you realize that a single mistake could be the last thing you do. Each maneuver was a ballet of precision, risk, and instinct human skill pitted against the vast steel defenses of a battleship designed to resist almost anything. Torpedo bombers and dive bombers coordinated their attacks, a choreographed chaos spanning miles of ocean. Lieutenant Charles Anderson, flying a SB-2C Helldiver, remembered the shock of hitting the water. You release the bomb, pull up, and pray it finds its mark. The explosions from other planes mix with the anti-aircraft fire. It's deafening, disorienting. You feel small, yet somehow part of something massive, a tide of iron and courage. From their perspective, the engagement was not just about strategy. It was an intimate struggle between human nerves, mechanical precision, and raw determination. Communication was constant, radios crackling with reports of hits, evasive maneuvers, and losses. Pilots who survived the initial passes watched as the Yamato listed, fire spreading across decks, smoke billowing like volcanic ash. Even though we were trained to focus on our target, it was impossible not to see the human cost, Anderson added. Decks on fire, sailors leaping into the sea, it was a brutal reminder that war isn't just numbers and tonnage, it's people. Despite the chaos, pilots acted with coordination and discipline. Squadron leaders made split-second decisions to adjust attack patterns, rotate aircraft to prevent concentrated losses, and exploit openings in Yamato's formidable defenses. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan described the intensity. You're in the air, watching this massive ship trying to shoot you down, yet you also trust your squadron, your training, and your instincts. Every maneuver is life or death, and somehow, amidst all that, there's a strange rhythm to it. The engagement became a symphony of human skill, bravery, and calculated risk, every individual act contributing to a collective outcome. The pilots' perspectives also reveal the psychological impact of facing such a legendary opponent. Many admitted a mixture of reverence and fear. Even after the first wave, when parts of the ship were smoking, there was still that sense of awe, Sullivan reflected. It's hard to explain a ship that embodies the pride and spirit of an empire, now writhing under your assault. It's terrifying, yet you have to keep going. These moments underscore the duality of combat. The mechanical and tactical objectives intertwine with deep emotional responses, shaping every decision in the heat of battle. From high above, the pilots could also see the effectiveness of teamwork, waves of aircraft hitting simultaneously from multiple angles, forcing the Yamato to split its defenses. Dive bomber, torpedo bomber, and fighter planes all played a part, each dependent on the other. The human element, the cohesion of trained individuals working as one, became the ultimate weapon against a ship that seemed invincible. By late afternoon, as the smoke cleared and the Yamato began to list irrevocably, the pilots' focus shifted from attack to observation, ensuring survivors could be rescued and avoiding collisions amid floating wreckage. Seeing her go down, knowing the crew had faced unimaginable odds, it was haunting, Anderson said. We'd done our job, but we'd witnessed a colossal force humbled, and we'd seen what human courage could endure. The American pilots' perspectives transformed the epic story of Yamato's destruction into a deeply human narrative. It is not merely the tale of a battleship sunk by overwhelming air power, but a portrait of men in the sky, navigating fear, awe, and mortality with discipline, skill, and resolve. Their eyes, hearts, and nerves combined with the precision of aircraft and ordnance turned a mythic enemy into a historical reality, leaving an indelible mark on naval aviation and the human imagination. April 7, 1945, 9 a.m. Yamato's bridge and command deck. High above the East China Sea, the sun glinted off the massive decks of Yamato, casting long shadows across her armored bulk. Inside, Admiral Ito and his staff moved with a tense urgency, eyes scanning radar screens and binoculars alike. The legendary battleship, a symbol of Japanese naval pride, now faced an enemy unlike any before, hundreds of American planes striking with precision, speed, and relentless determination. Admiral Ito, historically composed but increasingly anxious, realized that his calculations underestimated the scale of the assault. Reports from the forward lookout came in rapid succession, multiple incoming aircraft from port and starboard, dive bombers and torpedo planes converging. Anti-aircraft fire is insufficient. Every report sliced into the confidence of a command used to controlling the seas. The pride of the Imperial Navy was suddenly vulnerable. Below deck, officers tried to organize defensive measures. Anti-aircraft gunners trained their 127mm and 25mm weapons, shouting coordinates over the din of engines and alarms. Lieutenant Commander Sato, overseeing a battery, recalled, "We knew she was supposed to be invincible. Every calculation, every drill suggested she could repel anything. But now, hundreds of aircraft. And they weren't afraid. They just kept coming." The human tension is palpable, a collision of doctrine, pride, and the sheer unpredictability of war. Japanese commanders struggled to make split-second decisions. Should they maneuver the massive ship to evade torpedo runs? Should they focus fire on specific aircraft waves, risking exposure to the next? Every choice carried the weight of lives. Thousands of sailors depended on these decisions. Commander Takahashi, in the engine control room, felt the vibrations of near misses. We could feel the water exploding alongside the hull. Each shock wave echoed through the steel. It was like the ocean itself was being ripped apart, and we were trapped inside. The officer's fear was both professional and profoundly human, a stark contrast to the calculated detachment often associated with military command. The Yamato's immense size, normally a source of invincibility, now became a liability. Maneuvering was sluggish. Anti-aircraft fire, while intense, could not cover all angles simultaneously. Japanese officers realized the Americans were exploiting the ship's scale, using saturation tactics that no single weapon system could fully counter. Admiral Ito observed the plane's precision attacks, noting the symmetry of approach, the coordination, and the timing. Human skill amplified by numbers. They were not just attacking, they were orchestrating a relentless symphony of destruction, he later reflected. Despite overwhelming odds, the commanders acted with professionalism and courage. Orders were shouted, fire adjusted, damage assessed. We could hear the gunners shouting, the deck officers running, the engineers below screaming over the roar of the engines, one surviving officer recounted decades later. It was chaos, but controlled chaos, every man doing what he could to preserve the ship and crew. Here the human element emerges again. Even in the face of impending doom, discipline and training persist, showcasing resilience and resolve. Japanese officers also experienced the emotional weight of failing, a symbol of the empire. Yamato was more than a ship. It was national pride, technological achievement, and a morale beacon for a navy struggling against overwhelming Allied power. Every explosion, every strafing run from above, was a psychological blow as much as a physical one. Commander Sato remembered looking at the list developing on the horizon. I had been trained to command, to act decisively. But there was a sinking feeling, literally and figuratively. Our pride, our strategy all being torn apart by men in the sky. Even as the Yamato succumbed, Japanese commanders attempted to salvage dignity. Orders to abandon ship were given efficiently, ensuring as many lives as possible could reach the water safely. Officers organized life rafts, issued instructions, and helped sailors escape through smoke-filled decks. Admiral Ito and his senior staff remained calm under unimaginable stress, embodying stoicism amidst catastrophe. The human courage in this moment mirrored the bravery displayed by the attackers above, two sides of the same historical drama, caught in a life-and-death ballet. By the end of the engagement, the Japanese commanders had witnessed the transformation of naval warfare firsthand. Yamato's legendary invincibility was shattered not just by firepower, but by coordination, human ingenuity, and the psychological edge of a determined, relentless enemy. The survivors' stories would later convey both humility and admiration for the skill of the American pilots, even as they mourned the loss of their ship and comrades. From their perspective, the sinking of Yamato was more than a military defeat. It was a testament to the evolving nature of war, the limits of technological might, and the unyielding resolve of human beings when they act in concert. In the end, the Japanese commander's eyes reflect the complexity of combat. Fear, pride, grief, and respect all interwoven, offering a human counterpoint to the cinematic destruction seen from the skies above. April 7, 1945. Aftermath over the East China Sea. The morning haze of the East China Sea hung heavy with smoke, salt spray, and the echoes of detonations. Yamato, once the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, had vanished beneath the waves, leaving only debris and floating wreckage in its wake. For the American forces, the destruction of the world's largest battleship was a triumph of coordination, courage, and innovation. For the Japanese, it was a stark, devastating symbol, the end of an era where sheer armor and firepower alone could dominate the seas. The loss reverberated far beyond the immediate battlefield. Japanese naval planners, even in their distant command centers, realized that the paradigm of naval warfare had irrevocably shifted. Aircraft had become the ultimate equalizer. A single coordinated strike from hundreds of planes could render even the most fortified battleship obsolete. The strategic calculus of the Pacific War now demanded acknowledgement of air supremacy as the decisive factor. Admiral Kurita, observing reports from his fleet, wrote later, "The Yamato was our shield and spear, our symbol of dominance." Yet, in the hands of the enemy, it became vulnerable to a lesson written in fire and water. For the U.S. Navy and Allied Command, the sinking reinforced an operational truth. Concentrated, well-coordinated air attacks could dismantle enemy power almost overnight. Planners across the Pacific studied the engagement meticulously. Pilots' reports were analyzed, radar coordination techniques refined, and future amphibious and carrier operations restructured. The Yamato's destruction was not just a tactical victory. It was a blueprint for overwhelming force applied with precision and psychological momentum. Every dive-bombing run and torpedo strike offered lessons on timing, angle of approach, and the importance of anticipating enemy evasive maneuvers. The human element was equally significant. American pilots who survived the relentless anti-aircraft fire returned with stories of bravery, improvisation, and split-second heroics. It was like threading needles through steel, one veteran recalled. The ship was massive, and yet every maneuver, every evasive roll, tested our limits. But we were determined. We had to succeed. These narratives would inspire future generations of naval aviators, emphasizing not just mechanical skill, but human determination under pressure. On the Japanese side, survivors and strategists grappled with the psychological impact. The loss of Yamato was a blow to morale, but it also forced reflection and adaptation. Training manuals were rewritten, emphasizing dispersal of assets, anti-aircraft integration, and the role of smaller, more flexible ships in future engagements. Commanders understood that traditional doctrine relying on a single massively armed battleship to secure naval dominance was no longer viable. The war had evolved, and human adaptability would become as crucial as steel and firepower. Moreover, the sinking had implications for the broader Pacific campaign. The Japanese Navy's ability to contest Allied advances was effectively crippled, altering supply lines, defensive postures, and strategic planning. U.S. forces seized islands and advanced with renewed confidence, knowing that the psychological and material power of Japan's remaining battleships had been diminished. The East China Sea, once dominated by imperial might, became a corridor of opportunity for coordinated Allied operations. Yet even in this strategic shift, the human cost remained tangible. Thousands of sailors were lost with Yamato, and the survivors carried scars physical, emotional, and spiritual for the remainder of the war. Families across Japan mourned, while commanders confronted the reality that no ship, no matter how mighty, could shield men from the unpredictable calculus of modern war. The intersection of technology, tactics, and human endurance had never been so stark. By the close of the day, as the sun dipped low over the sea, the legacy of Yamato's sinking was clear. It marked a turning point in naval warfare, where agility, air power, and human ingenuity triumphed over traditional might. The destruction reshaped strategies, inspired lessons in coordination and adaptability, and underscored a timeless truth: no symbol of power is invincible against the combined force of human skill and determination. April 7, 1945, sunset, East China Sea. As the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the East China Sea in hues of gold and crimson, the ocean seemed to mourn the loss of its mightiest vessel. Yamato, once the crowning jewel of the Imperial Japanese Navy, had disappeared beneath the waves, leaving behind only scattered debris, drifting lifeboats, and the echoes of torpedo strikes. The battle had ended, yet its story resonated far beyond the physical destruction. It was a testament to the intersection of human ingenuity, courage, and the relentless evolution of warfare. The sheer scale of Yamato had inspired awe for years. Its massive guns, reinforced hull, and meticulous design were symbols of Japan's industrial ambition and naval pride. Admirals boasted it was unsinkable, a floating fortress capable of withstanding anything the enemy could muster. Yet on that fateful day, the combined might of 300 U.S. aircraft proved that no fortress could defy the laws of strategy, coordination, and human determination. It was not brute strength alone that decided the battle, but precision, timing, and audacious courage in the face of overwhelming odds. From the air, American pilots had executed their mission with calculated daring. Each dive-bombing run, every torpedo dropped, demanded not only skill but nerve. The roar of engines, the flak bursting in clouds around them, and the fleeting glimpses of the massive hull below all converged into a ballet of chaos and purpose. Men risked their lives in the cockpit, threading needles through a storm of fire to achieve a single decisive objective. And they succeeded. The unthinkable happened when Yamato sank, a colossal titan claimed by swarms of seemingly fragile machines, and the human hands that wielded them. Below deck, Japanese sailors faced unimaginable terror. Amid the explosions, flooding compartments, and deafening chaos, acts of heroism and resilience unfolded. Sailors improvised, carried wounded comrades, and attempted to save what remained of the ship. Some survived, clinging to wreckage, while thousands were lost to the unforgiving sea. Their stories, preserved through eyewitness accounts, capture the human cost of warfare, courage, fear, sacrifice, and the haunting weight of inevitability. Strategically, the sinking marked more than a tactical victory. It signaled the obsolescence of battleships as the ultimate arbiters of naval dominance. Aircraft carriers, air power, and coordinated attacks had redefined the rules of engagement. Japanese commanders recognized the devastating consequences of underestimating flexibility, speed, and technological integration. Conversely, Allied forces gained confidence, validating their evolving doctrine and inspiring further innovations in combined arms warfare. The Battle of Yamato became a textbook example of modern naval strategy, where adaptation and human initiative could topple even the most formidable defenses. Yet, amidst this technical and tactical analysis lies a deeper reflection on the fragile balance between human ambition and vulnerability. Yamato was a marvel of engineering, a floating testament to skill, precision, and industrial power. And yet, it could not shield the lives aboard it from the unpredictable, relentless calculus of war. It reminds us that even the greatest creations, no matter how meticulously crafted, exist within the context of human decision, courage, and the inexorable march of history. As the waves calmed and night began to cloak the East China Sea, debris drifted silently across the water, bathed in moonlight. The survivors looked back at the empty horizon where Yamato once ruled, a mixture of awe, grief, and solemn respect etched on their faces. Pilots, sailors, and commanders carried the memory of that day, a story of precision, courage, tragedy, and the enduring power of human will. The legend of Yamato endures not solely as a symbol of imperial might or technological prowess, but as a narrative woven from the threads of human experience. It is the story of innovation meeting audacity, of men facing impossible odds with resolve, and of a battle that reshaped the course of naval warfare forever. In the wreckage and in memory, Yamato teaches a timeless lesson, that no matter how invincible a fortress may appear, the ingenuity, courage, and determination of men can turn the tide, redefine the battlefield, and etch their story into history. And so the ocean holds its silence, reflecting both the grandeur of human ambition and the humility of its limits, a final cinematic testament to Yamato's last voyage, and the men who lived and died beneath its shadow.